To the degree it's possible to see Trumpism and MAGA as a coherent ideology, what do you think are the central pillars of it?
MAGA is a rejection of cultural elitism. That's what I would say. Cultural elitism, though, has many different categories. Immigration is one, right? Is that cultural elitism and cultural liberalism has a fundamental belief that immigration in and of itself is a natural good at any and all levels, that all immigrants are like replacement level, that there is no difference between them. Cultural elitism in a foreign policy context comes back to a lot of that human rights democracy stuff that I was talking about earlier, which divorces American values from American interests and says that actually American values are American interests. Cultural elitism and liberalism leads to the worship of the post-civil rights era bureaucracy that I talked about from those two books of DEI, of quote unquote woke, and of progressive social ideology. So I would put all those together as ultimately what MAGA is. It is a screw you. I once drove past, it was in rural Nevada, and I was driving, and I drove past the biggest sign I've ever seen, political sign to this day. And it was in 2020. It just said, Trump, fuck your feelings. And I still believe that is the most coherent MAGA thing I've ever seen, because everyone's always like, how can a neocon and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK and all these other people, how can they all exist under the same umbrella? And I'm like, it's very simple. All of them have rejected the cultural elite in their own way, certainly, but they've arrived at the same place. It's an umbrella. And it's an umbrella fundamentally, which has nothing to do with the status quo and with the, currently established cultural elite. That doesn't mean they're not elite and they're not rich in their own regards. That doesn't mean they don't disagree, but that's the one thing that unites the entire party. And so that's the way I would put it.
Anti-cultural elite, is that synonymous with anti-establishment? So basic distrust of all institutions? Is elitism connected to institutions?
Yes, absolutely, because elites are the ones who runs our institutions. That said, anti-establishment is really not the right word, because there are a lot of left-wingers who are anti-establishment, right? They are against that, but they're not anti-cultural leftism. And that's the key distinction between MAGA and like left populism. Left populism basically does agree. They agree with like basic conceits, like racism is one of the biggest problems facing America. They're like, one of the ways that we would fix that is through class-oriented economic programs in order to address that. But we believe in, I don't know, like reparations as a concept. It's just more about how we arrive there. Whereas in MAGA, we would say, no, we actually don't think that at all. We think we've evolved past that. And we think that the best way to fix it is actually similar policy prescription, but the mindset matters a lot. So the real distinction between MAGA and like left populism really is on culture. Trans in particular, orientation about actually immigration may be the biggest one. Because if you look at the history of Bernie Sanders, Bernie Sanders was a person who railed against open borders and against mass migration for years. There are famous interviews of him on YouTube with Lou Dobbs, who's one of the most hardcore immigration guys, and they agree with each other. And Lou is like, Bernie's one of the only guys out there. Bernie, at the end of the day, he had to succumb to the cultural left and its changing attitudes on mass immigration. There's some famous clips from 2015 in a Vox interview that he gave where he started talking about how the open borders is a Koch brothers libertarian concept, right? Because Bernie is basically of a European welfare state tradition. European welfare states are very simply understood. We have high taxes, high services, low rates of immigration. Because we have high taxes and high services, we have a limited pool of people who can experience and take those services. He used to understand that. He changed a lot of his attitude. Bernie also, I will say, look, he's a courageous man and a courageous politician. As late as 2017, he actually endorsed a pro-life candidate because he said that pro-life candidate was, pro-worker. And he's like, at the end of the day, I care about pro-worker policy. He took a ton of shit for it, and I don't think he's done it since. So the sad part that's really happened is that a lot of left populist, agenda and other has become subsumed, in the hysteria around cultural leftism, wokeism, whatever the hell you want to call it. And that ultimately that cultural leftism was the thing that really united, the two wings of that party. And that's really why MAGA is very opposed to that. They're really not the same, but the left populists can still be anti-establishment. That's the key.
It's interesting to think of the left cultural elite subsuming consuming Bernie Sanders, the
Yes.
left populist. So you think that's what happened?
That's what I would say.
What do you think happened in 2016 with Bernie? Is there a possible future where he would have won? You and Crystal wrote a book on populism in 2020. So from that perspective, just looking at 2016, if he rejected wokeism at that time, by the way, that would be pretty gangster during 2016. Would he have, because I think Hillary went towards the left more, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
It was a very weird time. So, yes and no. It wasn't full-on BLM mania like it was in 2020, but the signs were all there. So the Great Awakening was in 2014. I know it's a ridiculous term. I'm
I
sorry.
love it. Please keep saying
But
it.
so,
There's
well,
a ring
just to
to
give
it.
the origin, the Great Awakening is about the great religious revival in the United States. So people had, because wokeism is a religion, that's a common refrain. They were like, the Great Awakening is a really good term. So
Thank you for explaining the joke. Yep.
yeah. So the Great Awakening is basically when racial attitudes amongst college-educated whites basically flipped on its head. There are a variety of reasons why this happened. I really believe that Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations in the Atlantic is one of those. It radicalized an entire generation of basically like white college-educated women to think completely differently on race. It was during Ferguson, and then it also happened immediately after the Trayvon Martin case. Those two things really set the stage for the eventual BLM takeover of 2020, but fundamentally what they did is they changed racial attitudes amongst college-educated elites to really think in a race-first construct. And worse is that they were rejected in 2016 at the ballot box by the election of Donald Trump, and in response, they ramped it up because they believed that that was the framework to view the world, that people voted for Trump because he was racist and not for a variety of other reasons that they eventually did. And so the point around this on question of whether Bernie could have won in 2016, I don't know. Crystal seems to think so. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical for a variety of reasons. I think the culture is honestly one of them. One of Trump's core issues in 2016 was immigration, and Bernie and him did not agree on immigration. And if immigration, even if people did, support Bernie Sanders and his vision for working class people, like the debates and the understanding about what it would look like a healthcare system, which literally would pay for illegal immigrants, I think he would have gotten killed on that. But I could be wrong. I will never know. What that looked like.
Let me reference you from earlier in the conversation with FDR. It's not the policy. I think if he went more anti-establishment and more populist, as opposed to trying to be friendly with the DNC.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good counterfactual. Nobody will really know. Look, I have a lot of love for the Bernie 2016 campaign. He has a great ad from 2016 called America. You should watch it. It's a great ad. That's another very interesting thing. It's unapologetically patriotic, and that is not something that you see in a lot of left-wing circles these days. So he understood politics at a base level that a lot of people did not. But Bernie himself and then a lot of the Bernie movement was basically crushed by the elite Democratic Party for a variety of reasons. They hated them. They attacked Joe Rogan for even having him on and for giving him a platform that was ridiculous. Obviously, it backfired in their face, which is really funny. But there are a lot of a million examples like that, when they attacked Bernie for endorsing a pro-life politician, he never did it again. They attacked Bernie for having Bernie bros, people online, the bros who were super bro Bernie, and it was his fault. His supporters would say nasty things about Elizabeth Warren, and he would defenestrate himself and be like, yes, I'm sorry, please, my bros, stop that.
I think his biggest problem is he never went full Trump. He didn't go... he kept saying sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And actually, in 2020, I did a ton of analysis on this at the time. He would always do stuff like, Joe Biden, my friend. And it's like, no, he's not your friend. He stands for everything that you disagree with. Yeah. Everything. He'd be like, yeah, he's a nice guy, but he's not my friend. But he would always be like, Joe and I are great friends, but, we have a small disagreement on this. But, like you just said, in terms of going full Trump, they wanted to see Trump up there humiliating all of the GOP politicians that they didn't trust anymore. That's what people really wanted. But the other side of this is that the Democratic base in 2020 was very different than 2016, because by 2020, they full on had TDS, and they were basically like, we need to defeat Trump at all costs. We don't give a shit what your name is. Bernie, Biden, whatever. Whichever of you is going to best defeat Trump, you get the nom. 2016 is different because they didn't full on have that like love and necessity of winning. By the way, this is a strategic advantage that the Democrats have. Democrats just care about winning. The current base of the party, all they want to do is win. Republican base, they don't give a shit about winning. They just love Trump. So it's nice to win, but one of those where they will express their id for what they really want. Now, it's worked out for them because it turns out that's a very palpable political force. But one of the reasons why, you won't see me up here doing James Carville 40 more years is there's a law of something called thermostatic public opinion where, the thermostat, it changes a lot. Whenever you so when you have a left-wing president in power, the country goes right. When you have a right-wing president in power, the country goes left. Amazing, right? You can actually look at a graph of economic attitudes from the 2 months where Joe Biden became president after Donald Trump. So Republicans, Trump was president in the last year in office, the economy's great. 2 months later, the economy is horrible. That is a perfect example of thermostatic opinion, and I'm not counting these Democrats out. 2004, George W. Bush wins the popular vote. He has a historic mandate to continue in Iraq. By 2006, he's toasted. We have a massive midterm election. And by 2008, we're writing books about 40 more years and how there's never going to be a Republican in office ever again. So things can change a lot in a very short period of time.